What if I told you that some of boxing's greatest legends had incredible stories that only came to light after they passed away? From Benny Paret's tragic death that changed boxing safety rules forever, to Salvador Sanchez's surprising dream of becoming a doctor, here are the things we learned about boxing legends after they died. 1. Dick McTaggart. Most boxers dream of going pro, earning millions, and becoming world champions. Not Dick McTaggart, though. He was Britain's greatest amateur boxer, winning the lightweight gold at the 1956 Melbourne Olympics. He was so good that he was awarded the Val Barker Trophy, which was awarded to the best boxer at the Olympics. That's a biggie. It means that he wasn't only the best in his division, but also the best combatant in the tournament. With that kind of talent, you'd think that McTaggart would turn pro and take the boxing world by storm. But he didn't. Though he received numerous offers, he never turned pro. Why? Because he cherished his freedom. He loved boxing for what it was, not fame or fortune. This is something we learned to appreciate after his demise, how unusual it is for a sportsman to reject the potential for wealth simply to remain authentic. In retrospect, McTaggart's choice makes him one of a kind in boxing history. He showed everyone that winning is not always about cash, it's about being your own man and pursuing your passions as you choose. That is why he remains a legend today, even though he has passed away. 2. Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker. If you enjoy watching fancy fighters who cause opponents to miss with crazy speed, then you would have enjoyed Pernell Sweet Pea Whitaker. He wasn't only a champion, he was a defensive mastermind. Opponents threw punches at him and reached thin air. His head movement, footwork, and quick reflexes allowed him to be one of the toughest fighters to catch a clean punch. Whitaker became a 4-weight world champion, demonstrating that he wasn't flashy, he was in control. But only after he passed away did we begin hearing how much other all-time greats admired him. Oscar de la Hoya, who battled legends in the form of Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao, once remarked that Whitaker was the greatest fighter he ever encountered. That's a massive endorsement. Think about fighting two of the all-time greats and still having the audacity to say someone else was greater. That is how unique Whitaker was. Whitaker's story ended in tragedy. He was fatally injured in a pedestrian accident in 2019, which stunned the boxing community. When he passed away, fans and fighters told stories about his greatness in the thousands, and even those who never paid attention to his career understood just how great he was. 3. Sam Langford. Imagine being among the greatest brawlers in the history of boxing and never having an opportunity to win a world championship. That was the sad fate of Sam Langford, a fighter so talented and formidable that even champions did not want to fight him. He fought in several weight divisions, demonstrating that his ability was irrefutable. However, due to racial prejudice, he was never offered the chance to compete for the title. Langford, a Canadian, made his name as a formidable foe who could knock out much larger fighters. Even the great Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight champion, refused to give Langford a title bout because he knew how dangerous he was. When a fighter is too feared to receive a title shot, you know he is something special. What's even more amazing is that Langford kept fighting after losing his sight. Anyone else would have retired forthwith, but not him. He kept walking into the ring, which shows that his spirit to fight was greater than his physical disabilities. Unfortunately, Langford passed away in poverty, even though he was regarded as one of the greatest boxers ever. It wasn't until his demise that people began realizing his greatness. Nowadays, many boxing historians and fans regard him as one of the greatest pound-for-pound fighters in history, even without having a championship belt. 4. Ezzard Charles. Most remember Ezzard Charles as the heavyweight champion between 1949 and 1951, but his career outside the ring was as good as his career in the ring. Nicknamed the Cincinnati Cobra, Charles was renowned for his quick boxing, phenomenal defense, and capability to adjust to any fighter. He even beat Joe Louis, one of the greatest heavyweight champions in history. That alone would have secured him a place in boxing history. But what we discovered after his Denise made his tale even more intriguing. Unlike most boxers who concentrated solely on the sport, Charles loved jazz music deeply. He wasn't merely an admirer, he played several instruments, demonstrating that his abilities were not limited to the ring. It's not often you read about a heavyweight champion who could also make beautiful music. Even more astonishing, Charles was fluent in Italian. This demonstrated his intellectual nature and his interest in other cultures. It's not common to meet a boxer who has so many interests, and it makes his legacy all the more richer. Who would have imagined that a world-class boxer could be a jazz musician and a polyglot speaker as well? Charles' later life was challenging. He struggled with Lou Gehrig's disease, a crippling illness that robbed him of his physical functions. Even in his last years, he continued to be dignified and inspirational. Posthumously, the world of boxing began to fully realize how special he was, not only as a boxer, but as a man with complexity, passion, and intellect. 5. Henry Cooper. When individuals discuss the British boxing legends, Henry Cooper is never far from the top of the list. He was among the most well-known fighters in the country, famous for his hard left hook, which he referred to as Henry's hammer. He did something that few managed to do. He knocked Muhammad Ali, then Cassius Clay, off in 1963. That battle was one of the most discussed in the history of boxing. Cooper dropped Ali to the canvas with a huge punch, astounding the world. Sadly, Ali came back, and the bout was halted because of an over-the-eye cut to Cooper. Although he lost, that moment turned Cooper into a British national hero. What many people didn't know until after his demise was that Cooper was given some of the UK's top honors for his work in the sport of boxing. In 1969, he was made an officer of the Order of the British Empire, OBE, and in 2000, he was knighted. That means that he wasn't only revered inside the boxing ring, he was recognized as a prominent figure in the history of British sports. Sir Henry Cooper was not only a fighter, but a gentleman of the sport. His passing in 2011 created a massive gap in British boxing. But once he had passed away, people reflected and realized just how much he had contributed to the sport, not only with his fists, but with his class and sportsmanship. 6. Frank Aaron. Frank Aaron was a two-division world champion, reigning supreme in the late 1800s and early 1900s of boxing. He was born in Switzerland but subsequently settled in America, where he established himself as one of the leading fighters. Aaron claimed the world featherweight and lightweight championships, earning himself one of the greatest boxers of his time. Aaron was a good fighter, but more than that, he was a clever boxer. He didn't solely rely on power, he used brains and skill to win fights. This made him a nightmare to fight. But as with most athletes of his era, his career wasn't accompanied by the large sums of money boxers receive today. Once he retired, Aaron was financially struggling. Unlike today's fighters who are sponsored and invested in, he had to do ordinary jobs just to survive. It was later discovered that he was a rat catcher and even worked at Rolls-Royce. This was just how hard life was for retired sportsmen at the time. One day you're a world champion, and the next you're doing ordinary jobs just to survive. 7. Sugar. Ray Robinson. If there's one name that keeps appearing in debates on the greatest boxers to have ever lived, it's Sugar Ray Robinson. He wasn't merely great, he was on an entirely different plane. Most of the best brains in the sport believe him to be the most talented and accomplished boxer in history, establishing the benchmark for other legends to follow, including Muhammad Ali. Robinson's boxing record was crazy. He had 173 wins, 109 of them by knockout, in various weight classes. His movement, punching, and ring generalship made him almost invincible in his prime. His fights were like pieces of art, and people couldn't get enough of him. But flamboyance marked Robinson's life outside the ring as well. He enjoyed fast cars, sartorial style, and life in Hollywood. He even possessed his own pink Cadillac and drove around with a retinue of followers. Once he retired from boxing, life was not the same, however. Robinson yearned to be an entertainer. He attempted to sing, act, and even dance. Unfortunately, his show business career never quite got underway. To compound the problem, he had money troubles. Contrary to the financial planners and endorsements of today's elite athletes, Robinson's boxing earnings didn't last an eternity. At the time of his passing away in 1989, he was having financial troubles, reminding us how even the greatest stars will have problems after their careers have ended. 8. Hezekiah Moscow. Not all boxing legends are household names, but that does not make their lives any less interesting. Hezekiah Moscow was a black British boxing legend of the 1890s, but his life was far from normal. He was not only a boxer, he was a musician and a lion tamer. Moscow was during a time when black people were seriously discriminated against, particularly in sports such as boxing. Despite all these obstacles, he emerged as a famous boxer in Britain. His power and speed in the ring made him stand out, but his abilities were not limited to boxing. Once his career in fighting, Moscow switched to music, playing in bands and entertaining audiences in a very different manner. But maybe the most unexpected aspect of his life is that he was a lion tamer too. He worked in circuses, courageously entering cages with ferocious animals. That's a level of bravery even the toughest boxers would not dare to demonstrate. Moscow was not only a boxer, he was evidence that sportsmen, particularly black men in the 19th century, were thoroughly skilled to endure. 9. Len Johnson. Len Johnson was one of Britain's best boxers during the early 20th century, with a record of 93 victories in 135 fights. His talent was undisputed, but due to the racial regulations then in effect, he could not compete for official British titles. Then, the British Boxing Board had a policy that only white boxers could fight for national titles. It didn't matter how skilled Johnson was, he would never receive a fair shot. Rather than letting this defeat him, he continued to fight professionally and gained a reputation on the international level, showing the world that talent trumps discrimination. But Johnson did not just stop at boxing. Upon retirement, he became an activist and battled racism in sports and elsewhere. He engaged in politics, advocating for the rights of black and working-class individuals in Britain. 10. Bill Richmond. Bill Richmond was an African-American pugilist who established himself in Britain in the 19th century. His tale is simply unbelievable since he had very humble beginnings. He was born a slave in 1763 in America. But his fate had other plans in store for him. A British Army officer noticed something unique about Richmond and assisted him in gaining his freedom. He was then taken to England, where he toiled as a carpenter and later found boxing. Boxing at that time was a violent sport with bare-knuckle combat that could go on for hours. Richmond was different. Quick, intelligent, and tactical, he defeated opponents against some of the roughest men in Britain. Although he was a talented fighter, Richmond experienced racism throughout his life. People didn't think it was right for a black man to succeed in the sport, but Richmond showed them otherwise by becoming one of the most recognized fighters of his time. He even trained other boxers and operated his boxing academy, assisting in building the future of the sport. One of the most interesting things we found out about Richmond after his demise was how much he inspired the generation of black fighters that came after him. He opened doors for other black boxers to enter the ring and battle for their place in history. Without Richmond, some of the greats who followed him might not have ever had the opportunity. 11. Tom Molineaux. Tom Molineaux battled for 39 rounds in freezing rain, only to be wrongly accused of cheating. Tom Molineaux was one of the first black boxing stars in 19th century Britain. But his tale begins long before that, in America, where he was born a slave. Molineaux's path to boxing stardom was peculiar. He allegedly earned his freedom by competing in bare-knuckle bouts organized by enslavers. His ability was on full display, and having earned his freedom, he journeyed to England to find authentic competition. Britain at the time was the hub of the boxing universe, and Molyneux was prepared to make a name for himself. His greatest bout occurred in 1810 when he squared off against Tom Cribb, the British champion. This was no ordinary fight. It took 39 brutal rounds in cold December rain. Molyneux had Cribb on the ropes and was about to win when the bout was mysteriously halted. According to some, Cribb's corner got involved to provide him with an opportunity to recuperate. Ultimately, Cribb emerged victorious, but many feel that Molyneux would have been declared the true champion. To add insult to injury, Molyneux was accused of cheating, which was a false accusation, and it demonstrated how much racism had affected his career. Though the loss was his, Molyneux was well liked for his remarkable strength and ability. However, when his boxing career diminished, he lived in poverty. As was true for most of his peers, he found himself with little aid after retiring. He passed away in 1818, and his work was all but lost, until other historians began acknowledging him as an early groundbreaker who paved the way for black boxers. 12. Henry Sugar Goodson. Henry Sugar Goodson was born in Britain, but that didn't make his life any better. During the 1890s, Goodson was among the best black British boxers, but sadly, history has not given him the recognition he deserved. Most of the early black sportsmen were overlooked by the media, and Goodson's tale is one that has been hidden for decades. We understand that Goodson was a phenomenal fighter and one of the first black boxers to make it big in Britain. Due to racial discrimination then, though, he was frequently overlooked for major opportunities. In contrast to white boxers, Goodson didn't receive the same amount of press attention or championship opportunities. What adds to the tragedy of his tale is that his contributions to boxing were largely forgotten upon his passing away. Unlike other boxers, there are not many detailed accounts of his career. It is only in recent years that historians have begun to acknowledge him as one of the early black British boxing pioneers. 13. Tiger Flowers and Tiger Flowers, or the Georgia Deacon, was a trailblazing boxer. Born in 1895, he was the first black middleweight champion in 1926. During an era when racial segregation made it almost impossible for black players to excel, Flowers fought his way to the top, shattering barriers in the sport of boxing. In the ring, he was a speedster, a skilled and aggressive fighter. But outside of the ring, he was different. Flowers was a deeply religious man. He would pray before each fight using Bible quotes, and he felt his success was the result of being a religious man. It was strange for many fans and opponents to witness a tough fighter praying before, but for Flowers, religion was his biggest asset. Tragically, his life was shortened at the age of just 32. In 1927, he underwent surgery for a routine operation on his eye, but never awoke. His sudden passing away amazed the world of boxing. Posthumously, more accounts of his strong religious beliefs and generosity came to light. It happens that Flowers wasn't only a winner in the ring, he was a role model too, who stood for fairness, respect, and faith. His heritage is not only being the first black middleweight champion, but being strong and spiritual at the same time. 14. Jimmy Wilde. Jimmy Wilde was a small but lethal figure in the boxing ring. A Welshman born in 1892, Wilde was one of the all-time great flyweights. Wilde's thin, specter-like looks gave him his nickname, the Ghost with a Hammer in His Hand. Thin as he seemed, Wilde packed a massive amount of punching power and could dispatch much larger fighters with ease. His fighting ability ranked him among the most feared and respected boxers of his generation. He was the world flyweight champion in 1916 and was regarded as agile with lightning-quick reflexes. What people didn't realize throughout his career was that he was a different person entirely. He was a poet. When Wilde passed away in 1969, his friends and relatives revealed that he had spent most of his life composing poetry. This surprised fans since they only knew him as a boxer. His poems were not about violence or aggression, but about life, feelings, and his childhood growing up in Wales. It revealed that even the toughest boxers can have a soft and artistic nature. 15. Barney Ross. Barney Ross was not only a boxer, he was a warrior. Born in 1909, he was a three-division world champion with titles in lightweight, light welterweight, and welterweight. He was renowned for his extraordinary staying power, clever boxing technique, and willingness to take a punch without retreating. But Ross's belligerent nature did not end in the ring. When World War II erupted, he joined the U.S. Marines, demonstrating his courage in combat. On one mission during the attack on Guadalcanal, he was severely wounded but continued to rescue fellow soldiers, winning a Silver Star for valor. But war altered him irrevocably. To cope with the pain from his wounds, Ross became hooked on morphine, which resulted in years of personal issues. When he passed away in 1967, numerous tales of his addiction emerged, and individuals were forced to consider that even the most resilient warriors struggle with inner conflict. His legend further raised awareness about mental illness and substance addiction among athletes, so that even a champion may require assistance. 16. Sonny Liston. Sonny Liston was among the most fearsome heavyweight champions in history. The 6'1" champion with a huge reach and knockout capability struck fear in the hearts of fighters inside the ring. Liston dominated boxing during the 1960s, and his punching brutality was terrible news for any opponent. But in the outside world, his life was full of scandal. Liston's past life was marred with connections to organized crime, encounters with law enforcement, and a reputation that raised eyebrows so much so that many wondered what was going on behind closed doors. Even when he did win the heavyweight title in 1962, some would not believe him to be a genuine champion, partly due to his associations with shady characters. And then, in 1970, Liston was discovered dead in his house in suspicious circumstances. Officially, he was deemed to have passed away from an overdose, but many are convinced there was foul play. Some theorize that he was assassinated because of his ties to organized crime, while others say he had anger issues with the wrong people. To this day, nobody is aware of what exactly happened to Sonny Liston, which makes his demise one of the greatest mysteries in the history of boxing. 17. Joe Louis. Joe Louis is best regarded as one of the best heavyweight champions in the history of the sport. Born in 1914, Louis became an icon of hope during a period when America was reeling from the Great Depression and World War II. Heavyweight title holder for an astonishing 12 years, 1937, 1949. Louis was a formidable puncher with an unflappable, stern demeanor. His most noted bout was in 1938 when he defeated German boxer Max Schmeling, who had been utilized as a Nazi propaganda figure. His win made Louis a national icon. Nonetheless, even though he was successful in the ring, Louis had severe financial issues after retirement. The government alleged that he owed a tremendous sum of unpaid taxes, and he lost most of his money. To make matters worse, promoters, managers, and even so-called friends had financially exploited him. He spent the rest of his life working odd jobs to make ends meet, such as selling tickets at a casino. When he passed away in 1981, it came as a shock to hear how much he had been taken advantage of. 18. Rocky Marciano. Unlike most other boxing legends, Rocky Marciano retired undefeated. Born in 1923, he was crowned heavyweight champion in 1952 and successfully defended his title 6 times before retiring in 1956 with a flawless 49-0 record. With his never-say-die fighting style, iron chin, and phenomenal knockout ability, Marciano was one of the most feared boxers of his generation. But following his retirement, Marciano had trouble adjusting to life outside the ring. He had missed the rush of battle and the thrill of being a champion. Unlike contemporary boxers, he did not earn huge sums of money, and he frequently concerned himself with money. Following his demise in a plane crash in 1969, it was discovered that he had been contemplating a return to the sport of boxing. According to some sources, he had been negotiating a possible return to the ring, perhaps in exhibition bouts. This discovery revealed how challenging retirement is for sportsmen, particularly those accustomed to the excitement of competition. Marciano was still in top condition and thought he could regain his former glory, but unfortunately, he never had the opportunity. 19. Benny Paret, Benny Kid. Paret was a Cuban welterweight title holder with a reputation for fearless and aggressive combat. He did not hesitate to take risks, and that made him a great fighter to watch. Sadly, that same never-back-down approach resulted in one of the tragedies of boxing. In 1962, Paret battled Emil Griffith in a widely expected fight. The two men had ill will toward each other, and the bout became more than a fight. It became personal. In the 12th round, Griffith fired a series of vicious punches that sent Paret slumping against the ropes. He never came out of it and passed away 10 days later of his injuries. His passing away stunned the world and compelled boxing authorities to re-examine fighter safety. Before Paret's fatal fight, referees took longer to halt contests, and medical inspections weren't as rigid. But following his demise, the sport implemented additional safety protocols, such as truncated fights, tighter medical inspections, and quicker stoppages to avoid fatal injuries. Though his demise was tragic, it brought about reforms that ensured boxing became safer for generations of boxers to come. Paret's life is a reminder of the danger that fighters put themselves in every time they get into the ring. 20. Salvador Sánchez. Salvador Sánchez was one of Mexico's all-time great boxing prospects, and most people feel that he would have become one of the greatest of all time had his life not been tragically ended. Sánchez was born in 1959 and became the WBC featherweight champion at the age of 21, successfully defending against some of the sport's biggest stars. He was famous for his phenomenal speed, technical ability, and iron will, a pure prodigy inside the ring. But on August 12, 1982, disaster struck. Sánchez lost his life in a car accident at the age of only 23, leaving the boxing world stunned. He was in the prime of his career with a record of 44 wins, 1 loss, and 1 draw, and fans were left to wonder how much more he would have done. Following his demise, it was announced that Sánchez had been set to retire prematurely, not because he wished to leave the sport of boxing, but because he had another ambition: to become a doctor. He had already begun contemplating life outside of boxing and wished to concentrate on medicine. This shocking revelation demonstrated that he was far greater than a mere boxer. He was a man with grand ambitions beyond the ring. Boxing is a sport of strength, skill, and determination. But behind the glory are the untold stories that only come out after a fighter has passed away. Legends such as Benny Paret and Salvador Sánchez made their mark in the world of boxing, not for their talent, but for what we discovered upon their lifelessness. These tales are important because they transformed the sport and inspired generations. They remind us that boxers are not just fighters. They are individuals with dreams, challenges, and legacies that endure. And ultimately, that's what makes them legends.